Yo, listen up. I absolutely need to tell you about what went down yesterday on NBA Today because it was genuinely one of the most revealing and strategically complex discussions about the Golden State Warriors roster transformation that I've witnessed all season long, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that Malika Andrews, Brian Windhorst, Kendrick Perkins, Richard Jefferson, and the entire panel spent nearly 3 hours dissecting the Warriors' dominant 123-91 victory over the Chicago Bulls, while simultaneously debating this seismic shift in rotation philosophy, where guys like Pat Spencer, Quinton Post, and Guy Santos are getting major minutes, while Jonathan Kuminga gets a DNP and Moses Moody barely plays. And perhaps most intriguingly, they explored this emerging possibility that Golden State could pursue Miles Turner from the Milwaukee Bucks to add elite two-way center production that would address their rim protection needs while providing the floor spacing that makes Steve Kerr's motion offense so lethal. And the way they methodically analyzed everything from Jimmy Butler's fourth-quarter takeover to the changing of the guard, with young overlooked players earning rotation spots, to the Jonathan Kuminga benching situation, to Turner's potential fit, alongside Stephen Curry and Draymond Green, had everyone in the studio completely engrossed. Because this isn't just about one regular season win over a struggling Bulls team, this is about the Warriors fundamentally reassessing their roster hierarchy and potentially making aggressive moves to maximize what remains of Curry's championship window, while also building sustainable success beyond the core that's delivered 4 titles. Hey, what's up everyone? 1 second before we dive in, that like button right there, hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that, like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. So NBA Today opens, and Malika Andrews has this intense analytical energy, like she's about to facilitate a discussion that touches on player development philosophy, rotation decisions, defensive identity, and strategic roster construction all at once. And she immediately sets the context by showing the final score of Warriors 123, Bulls 91, with Golden State absolutely dominating from start to finish in a game that was never competitive. And Malika frames the entire conversation by emphasizing that this road trip, which looked like it could be absolutely disastrous after the Warriors were down 20 points in the first quarter against Philadelphia, has somehow been salvaged to go 2-1. And perhaps more importantly, they've discovered legitimate rotation players in guys who were expected to be G League depth pieces, or end-of-bench guys who never see meaningful action. Brian Windhorst, who always provides crucial statistical context, jumps in immediately talking about the Warriors' shooting performance, which was absolutely elite, with 22 made threes on 47 attempts, good for 47% from beyond the arc. And Windhorst makes this observation that far too often this season Golden State simply cannot hit shots, and that shooting variance is the primary difference maker between wins and losses for this team. And Windhorst breaks down how the ball movement in this game was some of the best he's seen from the Warriors all season. They had 27 assists on their made field goals, which indicates excellent offensive flow and player movement, and he specifically credits Pat Spencer's unselfish playmaking style for creating that rhythm. Because Spencer never picks up his dribble unnecessarily, he keeps the ball moving, and he makes the simple right play rather than trying to force things. Kendrick Perkins then jumps in talking about Quinton Post, who he says has been absolutely phenomenal and deserves to be playing 30 minutes per night going forward. And Perk is genuinely passionate about this because he thinks Post represents exactly the type of player development success story that proves the Warriors' system and coaching can still cultivate talent, despite all the criticism about how they've handled Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga. And Perkins breaks down Post's stat line showing 19 points and 4 rebounds while hitting 5 three-pointers. And Perk emphasizes that Post is excellent in pick-and-roll situations with Pat Spencer. He spaces the floor as a legitimate shooting threat from the center position, And defensively, he's been one of the better rim protectors in the league by the metrics, despite being a second-round pick who started last season in the G League. Richard Jefferson, who was also on the panel, then provides this fascinating breakdown of why Quinton Post's emergence is so important for Golden State's roster construction moving forward. And RJ talks about how when you have a center who can legitimately shoot threes at a high percentage, it completely changes your offensive spacing and creates driving lanes for your perimeter player. And Jefferson makes this comparison to how modern NBA offenses have evolved, where stretch fives are incredibly valuable because they pull opposing rim protectors away from the basket. And suddenly, guys like Stephen Curry and Jimmy Butler and whoever else is handling the ball have these wide-open pathways to attack the rim without facing help defenders collapsing from multiple angles. But then, Malika Andrews introduces what might be the most significant storyline from this game, which is Jonathan Kuminga receiving a DNP despite the Warriors having 4 players out with injuries, including Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, Al Horford, and one other rotation player. And the panel is genuinely stunned that in a game where Golden State is severely shorthanded, Kuminga couldn't get even a single minute of playing time. And Malika plays the post-game press conference footage, where Steve Kerr is asked directly about the Kuminga benching. And Kerr gives this carefully diplomatic answer, saying they don't discuss internal matters publicly, but that rotation decisions are based on who's available, how the team is playing, and what lineups complement each other best. And he specifically mentions wanting to get Gui Santos minutes after what he did down the stretch last season and getting DeAnthony Melton back from injury and Pat Spencer's emergence as reasons why there were a lot of mouths to feed. Nick Wright then provides some crucial context about Kuminga's recent performance struggles and why this benching might actually be justified rather than some mysterious coaching decision that doesn't make basketball sense. And Wright talks about how Kuminga started the previous game against Cleveland and was genuinely terrible, going 1 for 10 from the field, missing threes, missing turnarounds from 5 feet, not moving the ball, and generally playing selfish basketball that hurt the team's offensive flow. And Wright makes this point that yes, Kuminga has shown flashes throughout his career where he's dropped 30 points in playoff games and looked like a legitimate building block, but the consistency simply has not been there. And at some point, you have to prioritize guys who are actually producing and helping you win games over guys who have theoretical upside but aren't delivering in practice. Emmanuel Acho then addresses what he thinks is the broader philosophical question about how the Warriors should be evaluating their roster and rotation decisions. And Acho talks about how for too long Golden State has prioritized draft position and perceived talent and physical measurables over actual on-court production and fit within the system. And Acho makes this passionate argument that it shouldn't matter where someone was picked, or what their athletic testing numbers were, or what their salary is. What should matter is how the team performs when that player is on the floor. And by that metric, guys like Pat Spencer and Quinton Post and Gui Santos have clearly earned significant rotation minutes because the Warriors look substantially better when those players are playing compared to when Kuminga, or even Moses Moody to some extent, are getting those opportunities. But here's where the NBA Today discussion took this really fascinating strategic turn toward potential roster moves the Warriors could make. And Richard Jefferson introduces this possibility that Golden State might look to consolidate some of their assets and make a significant trade to acquire an impact player who can help them win now, while Curry is still at the peak of his powers. And RJ specifically mentions that Moses Moody makes $13 million per year, which is a tradable contract, and Kuminga is supposedly viewed around the league as one of the more valuable young assets available. So if you package those two together, you're looking at $37 million in outgoing salary, which gives you the flexibility to target players in that salary range or potentially aggregate more pieces to get up to $50 million. If you're pursuing someone like a combination of Trey Murphy and Herb Jones from New Orleans, Brian Windhorst then jumps in talking about Miles Turner as a specific target, who makes tremendous sense for the Warriors from both a basketball fit perspective and a realistic acquisition cost standpoint. And Windhorst explains that Turner is exactly the type of two-way center that Golden State has historically lacked. He's one of the best rim protectors in the league, consistently averaging over 2 blocks per game throughout his career. But unlike traditional defensive centers, Turner can also shoot threes at an elite level, hitting around 39% this season on solid volume. And Windhorst makes this comparison to how the Warriors' offense functions best when they have maximum floor spacing and having a center who can spot up at the three-point line rather than clogging the paint creates so much more room for Curry to operate and get to his spots without facing help defenders sagging off non-shooters. Kendrick Perkins then gets really animated talking about the defensive pairing of Miles Turner and Draymond Green and how that front court combination would be absolutely devastating for opposing offenses to attack. And Perk talks about how Turner provides elite rim protection as a shot blocker and deterrent around the basket, while Green is one of the smartest help defenders in NBA history who can quarterback the entire defensive scheme and switch across multiple positions. And Perkins makes this point that the Warriors have historically struggled with interior defense and rim protection. They've never really had that true anchor at the 5 position who can consistently protect the paint, and Turner would immediately solve that problem while also fitting seamlessly into Golden State's switching defensive scheme because he has the mobility and lateral quickness to step out and guard perimeter players in pick-and-roll situations. Richard Jefferson then addresses Turner's potential motivations for wanting to join the Warriors if Milwaukee makes him available. And RJ talks about how Turner has publicly stated throughout his career that he wants to compete for championships and play in bigger markets where he'd have more visibility and exposure. And Jefferson explains that Turner joined the Bucks specifically because he thought they'd be competing for titles with Giannis Antetokounmpo as their centerpiece. But now Milwaukee's season has completely fallen apart. There's massive uncertainty about Giannis's future with the organization, and Turner might be looking at the situation thinking he needs to get out before this thing completely implodes into a rebuild. And RJ makes this argument that if Turner gets traded to the Warriors, who despite their inconsistencies still have Stephen Curry and legitimate championship aspirations, that would represent a significantly better opportunity for him to pursue that elusive ring that's been his primary career motivation. But then Malika Andrews raises what she thinks is a crucial question about what the Warriors would actually have to give up to acquire Miles Turner from Milwaukee. And the panel starts speculating about potential trade packages and whether Golden State has enough appealing assets to make the Bucks seriously consider a deal. And Brian Windhorst suggests that if Milwaukee decides to blow things up and trade Giannis, they'd be looking to accumulate draft capital and young talent for a potential rebuild. So a package built around Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga, plus maybe a future first-round pick. And some second-rounders might be enough to start conversations, especially if the Bucks are more focused on clearing salary and getting future assets than they are on receiving established rotation players who help them compete immediately. Nick Wright then makes this really interesting tactical point about how Turner would specifically fit into Steve Kerr's offensive system and why his skill set is so perfectly suited to Golden State's style of play. And Wright talks about how the Warriors' motion offense is predicated on constant movement, screening actions, and floor spacing that creates driving lanes and open looks for shooters. And Wright explains that when you have a traditional non-shooting center like Kevon Looney or even Trace Jackson Davis to some extent, opposing defenses can just ignore that player on the perimeter and pack the paint with extra bodies. But when you have Turner spotted up at the three-point line, suddenly defenses are stretched across the entire floor, and Curry and other ball handlers have these wide-open pathways to attack the basket, or pull up for mid-range shots, or kick out to shooters in the corners. Emmanuel Acho then addresses Turner's age and contract situation as factors that make him particularly attractive for the Warriors. And Acho talks about how Turner at 29 years old is right in his prime and could realistically be a core piece for Golden State for the next 5 or 6 years, which means he's not just a rental for Curry's final seasons, but potentially someone who bridges into whatever the post-Curry era looks like. And Acho mentions that Turner's contract with Milwaukee is around $26 to $27 million per season, which in today's NBA salary cap environment is actually incredibly reasonable and manageable for a player of his caliber and two-way impact, so the Warriors wouldn't be taking on some massive financial burden that limits their flexibility in future offseason. Richard Jefferson then makes what I thought was the most compelling argument of the entire segment about why the Warriors need to be aggressive right now, rather than waiting and hoping their young players eventually develop into consistent contributors. And RJ talks about how Stephen Curry is 36 years old, and while he's still playing at an elite level, you simply cannot waste any remaining years of his prime waiting for guys like Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga to figure things out. And Jefferson makes this passionate point that Golden State has already given those young players extensive opportunities over multiple seasons. They've invested significant developmental resources and playing time, and if it hasn't clicked by now, it's probably not going to click in a way that meaningfully impacts championship contention. So the front office needs to acknowledge that reality and pivot toward acquiring proven players who can help them win right now. But then Kendrick Perkins raises an interesting counterpoint about roster depth and whether trading away Moody and Kuminga even for an upgrade at center leaves the Warriors too thin on the wings and perimeter. And Perk asks whether they'd have enough bodies to absorb injuries, foul trouble, or just to provide different looks throughout long playoff series against elite teams. And Perkins suggests that maybe the Warriors should focus on smaller consolidation moves rather than swinging for fences with some blockbuster trade, perhaps keeping one of those young wings while still finding ways to upgrade the center position through other avenues like veteran minimum signings or smaller deals that don't completely deplete their depth. Malika Andrews then brings the discussion back to the actual game that just happened and some of the emerging rotation storylines, and Malika talks about how Pat Spencer, who everyone expected to be just a feel-good training camp story, has somehow become a legitimate rotation piece who's playing winning basketball. And the panel reviews Spencer's performance, showing 12 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, with excellent decision-making and ball movement. And Richard Jefferson makes this observation that Spencer plays like an old-school point guard who understands how to run an offense and keep everyone involved rather than hunting his own shot. And that unselfish style has been infectious for the entire second unit. Nick Wright then talks about DeAnthony Melton's return from injury and how he looked smooth and comfortable in his 17 minutes with 13 points. And Wright makes this point that Melton is probably going to steal significant minutes from Gary Payton II, who only played 4 minutes in this game, because Melton provides more offensive versatility while still being a quality defender. And Wright suggests that the Warriors' rotation is finally starting to make more sense with guys who complement each other and fit specific roles, rather than just throwing out different combinations and hoping something works. Emmanuel Acho then addresses the Moses Moody situation, which he thinks is actually more complicated than the Kuminga benching. And Acho talks about how Moody has been a consummate professional throughout his career, with 0 off-court issues and generally solid on-court production, but he just hasn't taken those developmental leaps that would elevate him into a clear top 7 or top 8 rotation player. And Acho makes this argument that Moody's $13 million salary makes him a valuable trade chip, and if the Warriors can package him with Kuminga to upgrade at center or add another impact wing, that might be the best use of those assets, even though the organization reportedly loves Moody and values his professionalism and winning mentality. Brian Windhorst then provides some broader context about where the Warriors stand in the Western Conference playoff race and why making a move for someone like Miles Turner could be the difference between being a first-round exit versus a legitimate threat to make a deep run. And Windhorst talks about how Golden State is currently 13-12, which is barely above 500, but they're not that far behind in the standings, and if they can string together some wins and get healthy, they could potentially still compete for a top 4 seed. And Windhorst makes this point that having elite rim protection and interior defense would completely change their playoff matchup calculus, because suddenly they can handle teams with dominant big men or teams that attack the basket relentlessly. Whereas right now, those are major vulnerabilities that smart opponents can exploit. What really struck me watching this entire NBA Today segment was how seamlessly the panel wove together analysis of Golden State's immediate rotation decisions and player development philosophy, with longer-term strategic roster construction discussions about potential trades for impact players like Miles Turner. And I think the consensus was that the Warriors are at this critical inflection point where they need to decide whether they're still all in on competing for championships with the Curry Green core, or whether they're starting to transition toward a younger timeline built around whoever emerges from this current crop of players. And the Miles Turner possibility represents the all-in approach, where you're sacrificing young assets and future flexibility to acquire a proven two-way center who addresses glaring weaknesses and maximizes what remains of Curry's prime. And if Milwaukee makes Turner available, the Warriors absolutely need to be aggressive in pursuing him, because that type of rim protection combined with elite floor spacing is incredibly rare and could be the missing piece that elevates them from pretenders to legitimate contenders in a wide-open Western Conference.